Welcome to Carefree and Conscious, paranormal and profound authors with stunning true stories. If you like this type of content, be sure to subscribe. I'm your host, Susanne Wilson, the Carefree Medium and Intuition Educator. Today on Carefree and Conscious, the Electromagnetic Soul, a discovery in afterlife studies that could change everything, with Mark Anthony. Mark Anthony, JD, psychic explorer, who is also known as a psychic lawyer, is a fourth-generation psychic medium. You can see him on TV and radio, including on CBS TV's The Doctors, on Gaia TV and the Discovery Channel. He co-hosts a live stream show called The Psychic and the Doc. Mark is the author of 3 books, Never Letting Go, Evidence of Eternity, and the Afterlife Frequency. If you have ever been interested in understanding some of the science behind why afterlife communication is not only possible, but likely, then stay tuned. And now, Carefree and Conscious, Electromagnetic Soul. Mark Anthony, welcome to Carefree and Conscious.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's really great to be here. I'm honored to be on your podcast.
Well, I'm happy that you're here. I feel like I've got a kindred spirit. I know that I've got a kindred spirit. There are so many things that we have in common, and yet we both came to what we're doing now through different trajectories. I mean, everybody's an individual, everybody's unique, but your story is so captivating. You're born with gifts and you're realizing them early on, and then you have this route that you travel through life. Can we start with who was Mark as a young boy?
There's a lot of days that, you know how we had those days where we're kind of in the funk and gunk and you think like, what's it all worth and why does it all matter? And when that happens, I remember that I'm happy just to be here. And the reason that I say that is when I was born, I was a blue baby and I wasn't breathing. In fact, the doctor told my mother, he said, he looks like he's dead. We lost him. And she said, work on him. I remember my dad said my mother started yelling at them, you work on him. And so to humor her, they held me upside down and they were smacking me on the fanny. And all of a sudden I started to cough and they brought me back. So from day one, life has been a bit of a struggle. And then I almost died 5 times by the time I was 5 years old. And around 3.5, I started seeing spirits. I was like playing with my invisible friends, which is not unusual. And I'm sure you went through that too, Suzanne, but it's not unusual for a toddler to have invisible friends. But when mommy and daddy can see them as well, because both my parents also had mediumistic abilities, it runs in my family for generations. And their reactions couldn't have been more different. Mom was like, oh, he's got it. And dad was like, oh, geez, he's got it. Because my father's side of the family, he and his sister, he had 4 siblings, and one of his sisters, he had 3 sisters and a brother. One of his sisters was also a medium, as was his mother, Isabel, and their maternal grandmother, Grace. But they kept it very hush-hush under wraps. They were Northern Baptists from Pennsylvania. Whereas my mom's family, they came over from Italy, and the Italian part of the family looked at this as visions and as a gift from God. And my maternal great-grandmother, Giovanna, she was known as the woman who knows things in Little Italy and in North New Jersey. It's funny, it's like Tony Soprano's stomping grounds. That's where, my family lived. And the thing is, she was consulted by officials in the Catholic Church, from nuns all the way up to a cardinal would come and talk to her about her insights. And then my mother had these abilities. And if I can digress a bit, it's a funny story how my dad met my mom. My dad was a Navy SEAL, okay, but he was able to see dead people, and not the type of thing you talk about in the Navy, and especially in special forces. But he was at a USO dance And because he liked to dance, and that's, and he said, I saw this foxy looking dame, and he was talking about my mom. He thought she was like maybe 30. She was only 19 because she worked at a high-end retailer. So she got all the designer clothes and fashion and everything. Mom was always dressed to the nines. I mean, throughout her whole life. And he was all of, I think, maybe 21. But anyway, they were not only good dance partners, but on about the third time they met at a dance, my mother said, I got to tell you something before this goes any further. She goes, I see spirits. And of course, my dad replied the way only a sailor could, filled with colorful metaphors and expletives, followed by, I do too. And then I was their third and final child. I was not planned at all. And my older brother and sister, they're precognitive. They pick up on things before they happen, but neither one of them are mediums. So when I was about 3.5, I started seeing spirits, and my father was very concerned. The reason, Susanne, he was worried. Years before I was born, his sister Marjorie, who was a medium, she was married to this religious zealot, and I'm being kind by just calling him a zealot, who was afraid of her abilities. He thought that it was somehow demonic and evil. And I know that we've both put up with the nonsense from religious extremists who don't really understand the faith they claim to follow, because the scripture is filled with people with these abilities. And one day he was getting ready to go to work, and Marjorie's husband was a machinist. He worked at a steel factory in Pennsylvania, and she didn't want him going to work. In fact, she got very upset. She said she was feeling pains in her stomach, the solar plexus. We can get into that on the mechanics of spirit communication. Begged him to stay home. They had a big fight. Anyway, he stays home. That day, a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and the cable snapped, and the beams crushed the machine shop that he worked in and killed everybody in it. Now, if he had been at work, there's a 99% chance that he would have been in the machine shop at that time. Instead of being grateful, this intensified his paranoia of her spiritual gifts. So he conspired with an unscrupulous psychiatrist who had her diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. She was forcibly removed from her home and subjected to electroshock therapy for over a period of 6 months when she was committed to a mental institution. And it damaged her brain so much that she was a shadow of what she had once been. Never saw spirits again, never talked about it. And I never met my Aunt Marjorie, not in this plane. And so that's why when I was a little boy, my father was afraid for me. So he wasn't being mean or disappointed. He wanted to protect me. And so my parents are always, don't talk about this to anybody but us.
Oh, you got some good advice there. I can tell you, your dad was also activated as a SEAL, obviously, to be protective and on guard. And I can remember getting beat up and bullied on the playground as a young child because I'd say, I see somebody behind you, and they look and not see it. And I finally talked to my granddad, our Presbyterian preacher. And to my surprise, he said, yeah, I see those things too. So that really helped. But I still couldn't keep my mouth shut. I continued to get in trouble for a long time until adulthood. So what's it like growing up psychic, and how in the world do you decide I'm going to be a lawyer when you've got psychics at home and you've got all this support? If I were a skeptic, I would say, well, why didn't you just go win the lottery for your family if you were so psychic as a kid? You had choices to make. How does law come into this?
I wanted to go into the clergy, which is not unusual for mediums. We're drawn to the spiritual. And I went to Catholic school, I mean, for the first 6 years, and then I went to public school. And my family always had a reputation in the neighborhood for being weird, kind of cool, but weird. I always like to joke that we were sort of like the Addams Family monsters of the neighborhood. I mean, everybody knew something was a bit different, particularly my mom, because like you, I mean, she would talk very openly about her abilities. But when I was a teenager and I was looking into going into seminary, and the whole celibacy thing really didn't work for me. I'm just going to tell the truth, you know. And I thought there's too many rules and regulations. Plus, when I would discuss theology and spirituality with my parents, it went way beyond my mom's Catholic and my dad's Baptist upbringing. I mean, we would talk about Buddha and Krishna and Saint Francis and Gandhi. We'd be eating dinner and talking about this. And so I felt that there were too many rules and regulations in the clergy, yet I ended up going to law school. Now, talk about jumping out of the frying pan right into the fire. And the reason I was drawn to law is because it sounds cliche when you say I like helping people, but I felt that based on my skill set, I've always been a public speaker, a writer, researcher. I like the action of the courtroom. So it was very, very appealing. You know, it's like you were in the corporate world and you did a job that was very involved with human resources and personnel. You know, I like working with people. And I got a reputation in the legal profession for this guy's kind of weird because he knows things that he shouldn't know about people. And I'd see it a lot like in court. I'd know like what to ask. One time I was doing a trial and I was representing, initially I started as a prosecutor, but when I shifted over to criminal defense, on one of the trials, I had this client, and I don't mean any disrespect to him, but he was not exactly the best looking person in the world. I mean, he had a beard and he was short and he had some disabilities and he had this breathing problem where he had this breathing, and he kind of looked a bit like a garden gnome. You know, he just had that look. And he was charged with drunk driving. And he swore, you know, he didn't have it. And I was looking at the evidence. And of course, the arresting officer had to look like Tom Cruise from Top Gun. All right. Chiseled features, muscular, big, shiny badge. I mean, the guy was like, you know, one of those guys. And to make matters more complicated, the jury was all women. And so when Officer, you know, Top Gun is on the stand and all the women are looking at him adoringly, and he knew how to testify, and you know, he'd be asked a question, he'd look at the jury and flash his big pearly whites. And I'm sitting there going, man, this is really not going on. My client's like, you know, next to me. But the thing is, all of a sudden, it was time for me to cross-examine him. And he kept making a big deal about my client's eyes being bloodshot, you know, bloodshot eyes. And I said, well, officer, there's a lot of reasons people could have bloodshot eyes. Couldn't there be? I suppose so. Perhaps allergies. There's no indication your client had any allergies. I said, well, what about maybe if he was swimming in a pool and pool chlorine? That's possible, but there was no indication of this. And then I had one of those psychic flashes that we got. And I said, have you ever seen anyone with bloodshot eyes who's been crying? And he paused. He goes, no. I said, are you married? And all of a sudden he changed. He goes, I never made her cry. Like that.
Whoa.
And I
You did
knew,
something.
yeah, I got this message, ask him that. And I said, no further questions, because at that moment, every woman on the jury looked at him like, you. The jury came back when they went out for deliberations, they came back, and this is the quickest jury verdict I've ever had, in under 5 minutes with a not guilty. And that was entirely an intuitive sense that came to me because, yeah, I mean, you know, he was a police officer, and I'm sure, you know, for the most part, he's a really good guy. But behind the facade was a not so nice, abusive husband. And it's also something, and we were talking about this, you know, before we went on, is that there's a, you know, what people appear to be is not what they always are. And our abilities help us understand that. You know, I mean, pretty people seem to always get a break in life. I mean, you know, you look at Hollywood and all that. But the thing is, just because somebody looks a certain way, that doesn't mean they're going to behave a certain way. Just like my client. I mean, he looked like a gnarly kind of guy, but he wasn't a bad guy. And he was one of the few criminal clients that I represented that I knew was truly not guilty.
So what would make you want to change from being a prosecutor to a defense attorney? The whole vibe I get from you all the time is justice. It's like, to me, you walk with everything should be fair. I know it's not, but I wish that it were, and I'll do my small part to make life more fair to people. I mean, when fans come to you, you've got time for them. I've seen you at conferences, even if you don't really have time for them. It's like you have this sense of justice, but prosecution to defense, why?
It was a difficult decision, and I didn't like the politics in the office of the prosecution. And and the thing is, I tried a lot of cases as a prosecutor, and I won the vast majority of them. But because I was a bit odd and different, when people would come in, when they would bring in prisoners for arraignment, and they'd bring them into um, arraignment means a first appearance before a judge. When you're arrested, they have to bring you before a judge within 24 hours of the arrest if you're being held in jail, to make sure if the judge is going to grant bail or hold you. And I'd say child molester, drunk driver, drug dealer, spouse abuser, fraud, theft, before I ever saw the reports. And my co-counsels be like, how do you know this? You know, because when people have been in the drunk tank all night, they all kind of look rough and unsavory. And so I got this reputation, like this guy's a little bit weird. And so there was a private defense firm, and it was a big and very established firm. And a couple of the senior partners have been watching me, and they said, Mark, and you know, they said, you're too talented to be wasting your time with people who don't appreciate you. So they offered me an opportunity, and I got into that. But after a couple years, like I made it a firm policy. I never represented child molesters or forcible rapists. Just the aura they gave off when they came into my office made my flesh crawl. You know, and when people say you can't love or hate somebody that you don't love or hate about yourself, rubbish. Okay, as mediums, we're able to detect things about people from their vibrational energy, their aura. And an aura, everything has an aura, like the lamp behind me, the little red lamp. Okay, an aura is the glow around an energy field. Well, people have an electromagnetic field. We generate and emit electromagnetic energy, and everybody has an aura around them. You know, because people think that this is some new agey pseudoscience, except for the fact that auras can be photographed, and everyone can learn how to see auras. And then after a few years, I transitioned from the criminal aspect into complex civil litigation and started doing accident cases. And I specialized in head injury, and I began studying the human brain anatomy and physiology, which, when I eventually left the legal profession, was perfect for my study of mediumship and the scientific basis behind it.
Oh, so many mediums out there, and especially newer ones. If you ask them, how does mediumship work? What are the mechanics behind this? They'll say, I'm not really sure. I don't know. It just happens, or I was born with this gift and it just simply works. We actually can know how it works because it's working with our physical body. All of our gifts work through our physical body. You were prepared in a way to be a teacher because of those cases that you took with traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
But it took an interaction with your mother from the spirit world to get you to make that change from the attorney to devoting your life to something that really doesn't have job security like being attorney does. Can you tell us about what your mom did for you from spirit?
Certainly, and I appreciate you asking. My mother and I were very close. My dad and I were very close. I get along really great with my parents. And I was in my office one day and I was thinking about spaghetti. Now, I'm an Italian boy. Thinking about spaghetti is not an unusual thing. And I was like, God, I could really go for some spaghetti. And my secretary put through a call. It was my mom. And she said, Mark, I made spaghetti for lunch. Why don't you come over? And I'm like, okay. And my parents only live about 5 miles from my office. So I went over there, had a beautiful lunch with my parents. Mom looked tired that day. Okay. She was usually a ball of energy, but she looked really tired. And before I left, she said, I want to talk to you. And she hugged me and kissed me and said, I'm so lucky that you've been my son. I love you so much. And I kissed her and I hugged her and I go, oh, I love you too, Mom. Well, when I left, I just had this, it was nice, it was beautiful, but I had this ominous feeling. And the next morning, I was in court in front of one of the judges I like the least of all things. And his secretary, his assistant, came into the courtroom and said, Mark, we need you in chambers immediately. And I go in there and she's she hands me the phone and she was trembling and I knew it was going to be bad. And my secretary was on the phone and she was crying. She said, your dad just called, your mom died. Wham. Okay. And what had happened is she had what's known as a venfib, a ventricular fibrillation, where the electrical system in her heart gave out. So she had a peaceful passing, for, whatever consolation that is. I mean, for her, certainly, because she struggled her whole life with a lot of physical problems. It's not unusual for mediums to have a lot of physical problems and illnesses because the vibrational energy shift on a cellular level and the amount of stress emotionally and physically. I can see you understand completely. So we have to.
This is important, y'all listening to this. This is very, very important. I listen to Mark here because I've had people say to me, and right now I'm great, but I've had people say to me, if you're so gifted, why are you always so sick? You have the weirdest darn things happen to you. So yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, it's an energetic shift on the cellular level, and I can get to that in just a little bit. Let me finish this story, but that would be the perfect follow-up.
Awesome.
So, long story short, about 3 weeks after that, I was coming back from court, and I was a senior partner of a law firm, and all of a sudden I get this shockwave, those waves of grief. You think you're starting to handle it, and then another tsunami hits you. And I figured, all right, let me pull over. I can't go into my office crying, and I'm an emotional guy. I mean, I'm a tough guy. I mean, I'll go at it with you, but I do have a sensitive side. My dad, the Navy SEAL, always said, a real man is never afraid to cry for someone he loves who died. And so I was always thankful that I had a tough guy, but a sensitive guy for a dad. So I pull over into this convenience store parking lot and I'm sitting there in my car. And all of a sudden, Susanne, this flash goes off. Now, was it light inside the car? Was it light in my mind's eye to this day? I'm not certain, but I immediately, instinctively turned to the passenger side, the seat, and I saw the silhouette of my mother in the silver white light, and her voice fills my head. And she said, Mark, you have the gift of mediumship so that you would not be crushed by grief, but now you must help those who are suffering with theirs. Now, yeah, I've been seeing spirits my whole life, but this was different. And I start breaking out in a sweat. And before I could even begin to process that, the second message in her voice fills my head and said, it is your life's mission to help people understand that God exists, that heaven exists, that souls are immortal living beings, that humans can communicate with souls, and that we will all be reunited together in the light that you call God. I sink back into the seat of my car, and all I can say is, okay. And then, Susanne, I'm thinking, I can't tell anybody this. They're going to think I'm insane. But then it dawned on me, there was no turning back from that point. And I knew that this was a profound, life-changing experience. It's what Dr. Yvonne Kaysen calls a spiritually transformative experience. I hear about some people, oh, I was on a mountaintop in Sedona and blah, blah. Mine was more like a fire hose right to the face. Of course, I'm Italian, mom's Italian. That's how we are. Nothing subtle. Okay. But, but, it led me on a whole path of self-discovery. And within 2 years, I had been, well, not within 2 years, but over the course of the next about year and a half, I was offered a job at a government agency, and it was perfect timing because then I could sell my law practice, divest myself of that. Then my first book, Never Letting Go, came out, which is a guide on the journey through grief, and it was doing really well. And my manager, Rocky, got me booked at a gig at MSNBC. And it was cool being at 30 Rock in Manhattan. And we were in the studio right next to where they were filming Saturday Night Live. It was just awesome being there. But then she got me a speaking engagement right after that in Boston to speak at Harvard. So here we are, we're at Harvard, and all of a sudden my cell phone rings. It's the elected official. I'm working for this government agency. He said, the Republican Party is on my case because I hired a psychic. And I said, well, you didn't hire me because I'm a psychic. You hired me because of my work and experience in managing people. He said, Mark, he goes, you're taking too much time off. I go, yes, it's all vacation time. And he's complaining and going on. And I said, let me make this simple for you. He goes, how so? I said, please consider this my resignation. And he said, oh, okay. So I hang up my phone and then I look at Rocky and I said, Rocky, I just quit the legal profession. And she said, Mark, take a look around. Where are you? I go, Harvard. She goes, and what are you doing in an hour? I said, well, signing copies of my new book, Never Letting Go, and giving a lecture on the science of the afterlife. And she said, don't you think you're exactly where you're supposed to be? So that, I know it's a bit of a story, but that is how I went from practicing law to fully embracing my abilities and pursuing this new path. And I thank the divine power that we call God every day for my ability and for letting me see what my path is and understanding it.
Well, it's an amazing trajectory to follow, and your free will is part of that all along. Your intuitive abilities helped you to see those guideposts along the way of, okay, next decision. But thank goodness for your mom. She sounds like a great lady.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you this. About a dozen years ago, I had a big dental surgery that went awry, and I had a cranial nerve damage that
Ooh.
gave me trigeminal neuralgia for a while. Now, here's the gift from that. It lasted a good couple years off and on. Here's the gift from that. I had to study the cranial nerves because I wanted to figure out what is this thing that nobody can help me with. And this led me down this path of really understanding the mechanics behind mediumship. So now when somebody asked you explain how mediumship works, you're not one of these people that says, I don't know, it's just a gift. I don't question it. You actually explain in a longer format, if people want to hear it or read one of your books, how it works. Can you explain to people who know nothing about cranial nerves, who know nothing about intuition, can you give a short explanation of how the body is involved in the mediumship?
Certainly. While not everyone's a medium, everyone is capable of mediumistic experiences and having them. It's like not everyone's an Olympic swimmer, but we can all swim. Not everybody's a classical or rock and roll lead guitarist, but we can pick up an instrument and play. Not everyone's going to be a Stephen Hawking or a Max Tegmark when it comes to math, but we can all, for the most part, do math. There's a physiological basis. And in my latest book, The Afterlife Frequency, I introduce a term which I refer to as the electromagnetic soul, the EMS. And I'm very honored that a number of scientists who study afterlife and survival of consciousness have adopted the term the electromagnetic soul. We know from faith that every great spiritual teacher has taught that the soul, the spirit, the who and what we are, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. We know from the laws of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. We know from quantum physics that everything's made of molecules, which in turn are made of atoms, which in turn are composed of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which in turn are composed of the smallest particle known as a quantum, which is pure electromagnetic energy. Now, everything, oh, and for our physics friends who are watching, technically an electron is a quantum, just a negatively charged one, because an electron is 1/1800th the size of a proton. All right, so everything in our material universe at the subatomic level is made of the same form of electromagnetic energy. That means you and me, the microphones we're speaking into, the radio waves that this show is being broadcast on, the rings of Saturn and beyond. And people tell me, well, that's really hard to wrap my head around. And it's like, well, yeah, because it took like Albert Einstein, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, Louis de Broglie, Niels Bohr to come up with this, the world's greatest brains ever, to figure this out. Now, after years of research and studying the human brain, I developed the electromagnetic soul theory to describe what we really are, which is a soul, a spirit, pure consciousness, which is eternal electromagnetic energy. Why? Because the human brain, which is only 2% of the body's weight, uses over 20% of its energy. And the brain did not create the soul, it merely hosts it the way your computer hard drive hosts the programs on it. Now, from a physiological standpoint, so our brain is the computer hard drive, and it's got the EMS in it, the electromagnetic soul, and we have different areas of our body. About 4 inches behind the center of the forehead is the pineal gland. Ooh, pineal gland. For our yoga friends, the third eye chakra, labeled for very good reason. The pineal gland, it regulates our circadian rhythms, our brainwave frequencies, our ability to perceive light, because light is the common denominator between faith and science. Then our solar plexus, which is at the bottom of the rib cage, is the second most complex bundle of nerves outside of the cerebral cortex in the brain. And there's a number of biologists now referring to this as the second brain, which is not unusual. I mean, an octopus has 9 brains, one for each arm and then one in its head. So other species have more than one brain. And the solar plexus is where we receive the emotional sensations, the feelings, gut feelings. You think that expression is just a fluke? Talk to any first responder, anybody in the military, they're going to tell you about gut instinct. Now, it's the pineal gland, very sophisticated piece of equipment, and it's so tiny. It's the most misunderstood and most studied, most enigmatic gland in the body. Between the size of a grain of rice and a small lima bean, it has calcite and magnetite crystals in it, which have piezoelectric properties, meaning when stress is applied to them, they generate an electromagnetic field. With brainwave frequencies, we have 5: gamma, beta, alpha, theta, delta. Gamma, that's when you're doing calculus homework, you're on Final Jeopardy, your brain's cranking at full throttle. Beta, that's the state we're in now, the awake everyday state. Then alpha, and I always joke and call alpha the groovy baby state, because that's when you start to meditate, you relax, you start feeling really good. And then there is theta. Theta is sleep, sleep where you dream. And then there's delta. Delta, there's very little brainwave activity going on, but delta is very important. That's where you heal. That's where your body rebuilds itself, and it's just diverting energy to different systems and things. But it's on the alpha theta border, and it's right around 8 hertz, because each one of these brainwave frequencies operates at a different hertz level. And it's at this 8 hertz level between alpha and theta where psychic and mediumistic activity occur. For some reason, people like you and I, Susanne, are capable of going from beta to alpha theta within seconds and doing it voluntarily. This is also why mediums get sick so much, because we're doing a major energetic shift on a cellular level, and it's disrupting the energetic frequency of all of our cells. The brain feeds on sugar, and a lot of mediums, with all due respect to our colleagues, many of them get very, very obese because after doing readings, they crave sugar. So instead of eating like grapes or apples or some cheese, things like that, they're eating candy and the type of things which are causing obesity, which only compounds the health problems. Also, as a medium, we're like exposed nerve endings. We're very sensitive, not only to the vibration and frequency, but to ambient things. I mean, upper respiratory infections, all those things. So we have to be extra careful. I see some mediums at these conferences that we've spoken at that are getting roaring drunk right after events. And now everybody has their own way of running their life, and it's not for me to criticize people, but that's not something I do. Okay, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do recreational drugs. I'm kind of a health and fitness nut, and I do my best to keep fit, because health is precious. And if we're going to do this type of work, we have to keep our bodies in balance. Now, with the vibrational energy shift on the cellular level, that is a blessing, but it's also a burden and a stress on our body. And like you were saying, that's why mediums get sick a lot. But the other thing we have to keep in mind is that why do so many people all throughout scripture, all throughout ancient history, all talk about prophetic dreams, dreams where they encounter deceased loved ones? Why? Because when your brainwave frequency shifts from beta to the alpha theta 8 hertz border, spirits see that and they align their electromagnetic soul frequency to our brainwave frequency, and there's the match, and there's the communication. And for people like Susanne and I, we can do it voluntarily within seconds. We still don't understand why. We, meaning those of us who study this as a science. But for most people, it takes time. It takes drifting off into that state, which makes you more conducive. And it's really funny because people who like dismiss mediumship will also tend to believe the contact experiences they have in the sleep state, which are different than dreams. In a dream, there's all that surrealistic craziness where a car turns into a buffalo or whatever, But in a contact experience in the sleep state, you encounter a loved one in spirit. There's real communication. The episode has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's coherent. And when you wake up, it feels real. And because it is. So I hope that, I know that's a long answer, but that's still the shortened version of in my books, Evidence of Eternity, and more recently, the Afterlife Frequency. And the Afterlife Frequency, I go into this in extreme depth.
Thank you for that. And just to be clear for our listeners, I'm not faulting a medium that doesn't know how mediumship works. However, I want to encourage you to learn, to read Mark's books, to do your research and find out how mediumship works, because more and more humanity wants to know. And as a teacher, you're a spiritual teacher. When you're a medium, you're teaching people that consciousness can never die. And so why not teach them that there's a reason, there's a process behind why this is real. So it's not a fault, but it's becoming more and more important in this world with a lot of division and a lot of outside forces that want to conquer us through division, that we be able to explain to people, hey, we've got the evidence that you're not only are you never going to die, but you're going to live with your actions later on. You're going to look back on this incarnation. And so you want to do better. You want to be better. Seek perfection, but don't judge yourself for not having it. So what is your why did you write these books? Why did you write Never Letting Go, The Afterlife Frequency, Evidence of Eternity? What do you want people to get from these books?
Each of the books I've written so far have a specific purpose. I wrote Never Letting Go as a guide for the journey through grief. People say, well, never letting go. Grief therapists tell you you're supposed to let go. Well, the overall approach to the book teaches you to let go of the sorrow and the pain caused by the death of your loved one, but never let go of the love. And that's a very important distinction. And one of the pivotal chapters is teaching people that when someone you love dies, your relationship goes from one of a physical nature to one of a spiritual nature. And it's important in the journey through grief to understand that you have to accept the reality of the death. And through that acceptance, you'll begin to feel inner peace. That means, it doesn't mean you're going to be all happy, but you're getting to the point where you can live with it and realize that your relationship has continued, but not in the physical sense. And I've seen some pretty drastic examples. I mean, I was somewhere and there was a woman who had this doll, looked like a Cabbage Patch doll, and she was taking pictures of it with her husband, and they were interacting with it as if it was their child who had died. And that's not healthy. That's not healthy. They're substituting a doll for a little girl who's died. And that is you're not going to progress. And I felt very, very sorry for those people. When I was on the Never Letting Go book tour, people kept asking me questions. Is there a God? Is there a hell? Is there a heaven? Do animals have souls? Does reincarnation exist? Is there a scientific basis for this? And so I kept a list of all the relevant questions, and then that became the genesis for Evidence of Eternity, and which was received so well, people kept asking me for more science. And that's what led me to the Afterlife Frequency, because I wrote the book that if I wanted to know how this happened, that's the book I would have wanted to read. And I've been so overwhelmed by how well the Afterlife Frequency has been received worldwide. It's won multiple awards. It's even endorsed by the spiritual legend and film icon Shirley MacLaine and Academy Award winner Hilary Swank. I mean, it's in addition to several of the top scientists in the afterlife sciences field. And I look at the books that I write as part of my life's mission. I also write for Best Holistic Life magazine, and I write articles on spirituality every month. You can find out about all these and how to find these publications in my books on my website, afterlifefrequency.com. But I find that the books are very important because people need to understand this is not magic or hocus pocus. There is a sound scientific explanation for everything, including the spiritual. And it doesn't negate the spirituality or the sacred nature of it. It simply is explaining how it works.
All right, let's talk about one of the toughest topics that you and I ever have to deal with, and that's bereaved parents. We will each be speaking, presenting keynotes at the Helping Parents Heal conference in August 2024. And for those listening to this later on, they plan to do a conference every other year. There are 1,100 people coming live and tens of thousands that will be watching a live stream of those who are encouraging bereaved parents to continue their relationships with their children on the other side. It's a beautiful thing. I have been honored to Spirit just finding me years ago and having me introduce Elizabeth Boisson, who became the president, and Mark Ireland, who became the chairman of the board. And they've grown this to almost 40,000 members worldwide. And I see the mediums that they attract, like you, to work with them. And we have the biggest hearts. We have so much empathy. And it's not like, I would say in general, it's not like we're trying to be right and keeping score, because for as many times as you can be right during a session, don't be afraid to be wrong, because sometimes it's those little innocuous things that that parent really needed to hear. There's also a toll that this takes on the medium. And I know this firsthand because my first few years of having my office in Carefree, Arizona, I was only reading for bereaved parents for about 2 or 3 years. And talk about getting sick a lot. But I had a parent say to me one time, I said, I have to start limiting how many sessions I do for bereaved parents because it wears me down. And she said, well, just imagine how worn down I am being a bereaved parent. So you feel like you want to do more, you want to do more. So I see a lot of the mediums involved with this group wanting to teach people how to make their own direct connection, because there's only so much we can do. So my question here is two parts. How do you take care of yourself after, before, during, after a particularly emotional session like that? For example, here's the little boy coming in with his dog in spirit. I mean, those are like, oh my God, kill me now. And then how do you encourage parents to make their own direct connection, to even believe that they can do it? So there you go.
Well, preparing myself, I touched on this a little bit earlier. First off, you got to be in a good state of health. Now, that being said, when I've been on tour, I have done spirit communication events where I was sick and I was running a fever. And the interesting thing is, when I get into the zone, everything was fine. Okay, the messages came through. I did my job. I mean, I had COVID, and one time, I was doing online readings. I wouldn't, go out in public with COVID, and I was still able to do this. But then afterwards, I was completely wiped out. I mean,
I
even more
imagine
so.
so. I imagine
Yeah,
you're just like, your body had to say, Mark, really?
yeah. And God, I remember one time when Rocky and I were in New York City and we both came down with the flu, and it was 40 degrees and raining, and New York is a hassle anyway. But when you're sick but I got through it, and the people were very grateful for the facilitations with their loved ones in spirit that I was able to accomplish. But how I prepare myself is meditation. Keep yourself. I envision a beam of white light, the white light of the Holy Spirit, of the divine flowing through me. I always pray before I do a reading. I ask God to send forth spirits for the highest of purposes, to bring messages of love, healing, and resolution. I eat clean. I avoid real fatty meats and sugary things. I try to stay in as reasonably good shape as possible because of the physical toll that it takes on you. And then after a reading, I always make sure I give myself a couple hours of downtime. Maybe I'll take a nap or I'll go for a walk. I love swimming, so I'll go swimming because there's something about water. It cleanses your auric field and gets all that funk and gunk out of there. And for everybody, whenever you're feeling depressed, take a shower and envision the water as being the white light washing all your anger, negativity, and visualize it going right down the drain and not coming back. And there's actually historical basis to this. In many religions, washing of the feet. You know, you read in scripture about Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. We know the Pope does this, and certain religions, they don't allow you to wear shoes either in a mosque or a temple. And when studying auric fields, it appears that the energetic field kind of stagnates and bottlenecks below the knees. And one way of opening up that energetic channel is through water, because water is a high conductor of electromagnetic energy. So these ancient practices have a basis which we're now beginning to understand. It's like holy water in churches is salt water. If you ever walk into a Japanese restaurant, look on either side of the doorway before you go in. You'll see little piles of salt. Why? Salt is energetically, electrically charged, and in the Shinto religion of Japan, that they believe that wards off negative energy. And so you see these reoccurring themes throughout all the belief systems, and of course we know that salt is electrically charged. The second part of your question, what was the second part of your question?
Well, let's say now you've prepared yourself, you've had a particularly emotional reading with a bereaved parent. I just had one this week where the parent, he was still very upset at how much his child suffered in the hospital with the IVs and the shots and things like that. And here I have this beautiful boy coming through saying, hey, I don't even remember what that felt like. He's identifying himself. He's giving evidence. Nobody could know that it's really him. Giving a message, please, you've got to get this picture out of your head. So that happens. It's very hard to have a bereaved parent, especially in the beginning, believe that they can make their own direct connection.
Right.
Okay, so do you do
yeah.
that?
It's the Raft Technique. Now, the Raft Technique, which is which I introduced in the Afterlife frequency. I was here in my office and I was working on the chapter, and I was thinking, how do I explain to people who aren't necessarily mediums how to recognize signs from spirits and how to make that connection? And Susanne, you're a writer and a darn good one. And every writer understands writer's block. All right, it hit me, boom. And when writer's block happens, that's it. And it always seems to happen when I schedule the entire day off just to work on the project. And I'm like, So I thought, all right, shut off the computer. Okay, that's it. And I live near the ocean, so I thought I'm going for a walk on the beach, clear my head out. So I'm heading down the driveway to go to the beach, and all of a sudden I get these tingles, electromagnetic energy. So I'm like, and I get this about face message and head towards a bike path instead. So I head in the opposite direction of the beach. It's about midday. I'm walking down this bike path, and I see these two objects shining in the light. And I walk up to them, and it's a nickel and a penny. And I bend over to get them, and I hear my mom's voice. If their head's down, it's bad luck. And I started laughing because the Italian side of my family has a superstition for all occasions. And then I hear my dad's voice, it's money, grab it. So I'm laughing and I'm holding this nickel and this penny. I go, oh, look, 6 cents. And I go, wait a second, 6 cents. And now I knew, and all of a sudden cold chills and tingles start overwhelming me. And I go, okay, Mom and Dad, what do you want me to know? And in my mind's eye, I saw an image of my father when he was in probably his mid-40s, and he was standing in the ocean up to his waist, right near where I grew up. And he's holding this blue canvas raft. It had these like yellow rubber ends to it. And I remember this. We used to go wave riding on it and all that. And I'm seeing him with this raft. And then I hear my parents' voices in unison say, recognize signs from spirit. Accept the contact is real. feel it, don't overthink it, trust the message. And I go, Raft, R-A-F-T. And I ran back, flipped on the computer, and the words just flew out of my fingers. And it was like, thank you, Mom and Dad, because they obviously, their spirits picked up on the difficulty that I was having. And so in the afterlife frequency, I explained the Raft technique, and I do tell that story, but I also give some exercises that you can do to help broaden your not just situational awareness, which is being aware what's going on around you 360 degrees, but your spiritual situational awareness. And it's the third step where people really blow it. Recognizing, all right, I saw the coins, and I got the chills. All right, I recognize the sign. I accept it as real. Third step, feel, don't overthink. Oh, come on, this is just a coincidence. I'm imagining this. It's a grief-induced hallucination. Boom. And that's where most people will torpedo the experience. And that's the most challenging one. You got to get that overthinking hyper-analysis out of the way, feel, and then trust it. And when those messages start flowing through you, and I'm so honored and thankful that so many people have contacted me. And when I'm on tour, people come up, that Raft technique really works. And it's like, well, thank my parents. They're the ones that gave it to me. So that would be how I would recommend people learn to start being able to detect and get those messages.
That's great. That's one, just memorize it, follow it, and don't let anybody talk you out of your sign, your symbol, your synchronicity. That's another issue, is there's this tendency to want to share to the whole world. Post it on Facebook. I got a sign from my dad in spirit, and here's what he did. There are people ready to rain on the parade, and for different reasons.
Always.
They just can't accept it, or they also wonder, well, I'm not getting stuff like this. This can't be real. So it's cast not your pearls before swine and dogs, lest they trample upon them. No offense to dogs, especially. I love them. So what do you think about journaling? Is journaling the things that you receive from spirit? Do you think that's important? Do you support that and teach people?
I do, and thank you for bringing that up, Susanne. Journaling is very important for a couple different reasons. One, it is a lot of grief counselors will tell you to write your feelings, because when you do that, it's cathartic. It helps you get it out. But when it comes to spiritual contact, when you start journaling, and then you're going to, when you review it, you'll start seeing reoccurring messages and patterns. Because you have to realize spirits just don't come in, bloop, give you one message. We're dealing with infinite beings. We are finite beings, or rather, we're eternal beings temporarily encased in a finite shell, and our brain is geared for finite perception. But once we're released from our finite bodies and we revert to an infinite state, then you see the whole big picture. But through journaling, you're going to be able to understand the recurring patterns, the messages, and then let's say you'll get some type of message or sign that doesn't make any sense, and then 6 or 7 months later, another message comes through and it's like, wait a second, that seems to link to that earlier one, and now it makes sense.
Oh, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah,
patterns and trends,
patterns and trends.
how it's coming through, who it's from, what was going on at the same time that this happened. Like people say, I don't know who that sign was from, or who were you thinking of? Who popped into your mind? That's not enough. They want to get a reading and ask, who was that sign from? You can do this yourself. It's so great, the empowerment that you share and that you give to people and leave them with. In closing, is there just one last thing that you want to say? Anything that you want to share with us about our stress levels, perhaps in this world today, things that will help us to remember that this is a temporary experience? What do you say to people saying, I can't take it anymore. It's so stressful being in the world. Why am I here?
I'm going to reiterate the message from my mother, because I can't think of a better one, is that we have to realize that God, the divine power, whatever you want to call that energy, exists, that our souls are immortal living spirits, that the afterlife, heaven, nirvana, whatever you want to call it, exists, that we can and do communicate with spirits, with souls, electromagnetic souls, and when it is our appointed time to leave the material world, we will see our loved ones again. We never lose anyone. They merely, it's an energy transference from our AM radio frequency material world to the FM radio frequency of the afterlife. And so when we begin to understand that, it eases the burden of pain. And the thing is, Susanne, and I know that you definitely understand this, every day that we're alive is a gift. Although many days, it does not feel like that. And you have to realize that when you're going through hell, as Winston Churchill said, then keep going.
Keep going, and keep going with this inner peace that has been shared with you here so generously. Mark Anthony, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Visit our website, carefreemedium.com, or find us on social media at Carefree Medium. Thanks for supporting Carefree and Conscious.